It was the third consecutive morning that the Park household had been unusually quiet. The breakfast table, once filled with lively conversations and hearty laughter, was now steeped in an awkward silence. It had been 3 long, quiet days since an argument surfaced between you and Jimin. It was one of the typical silly fights that happened between the couples, maybe out of miscommunication or a forgotten promise. But now it had spiraled into silence. None of the two of you were willing to take the initiative and talk, pride and stubbornness being the root cause of the distance between you, and no one was willing to be the first one to apologize. Jimin's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Park, exchanged subtle glances, both knowing that something was off between you and Jimin. For days, they had noticed the tension. You and Jimin barely spoke to each other, moving around the house like strangers. The only time they saw you together was during mealtime. You both would sit at the table but in complete silence, avoiding each other as though the other person was invisible, each absorbed in your own world. The clatter of silverware against the plates, the only sound breaking the stillness. Jimin, how is work? Are you still swamped with that new project? She asked, unable to bear the deafening silence, her voice deliberately cheerful. She wanted to make things right. He hummed, barely acknowledging the question as he absent-mindedly poked at his food. Across the table, you sipped your coffee, your eyes downcasted. Mrs. Park sighed, her face morphed into worry and sadness. The silence fell over again like a heavy blanket, making it a tad difficult to sit through and eat. Mrs. Park nudged Mr. Park, jutting her chin towards the two statues sitting across each other. Mrs. Park sighed and looked at you. He cleared his throat, preparing himself to speak. And Ryan, are you still planning that trip for your office? Must be exciting, he exclaimed, mustering as much enthusiasm as he could. You nodded slightly but remained quiet. Mr. Park let out yet another sigh, shaking his head in helplessness. The silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. Mrs. Park frowned, sharing worried glances with her husband. Her gaze switched between Jimin and you. This wasn't like you and Jimin to go this long without talking, especially when you both loved each other so deeply. You and Jimin had always been inseparable, partners not just in life but in the smallest things. You would always leave for work together, laugh over inside jokes, and sneak glances at each other when you thought no one was looking. Moreover, they had caught you both in awkward position multiple times. Now it was as if you were worlds apart. Jimin's parents' eyes locked as a silent confabulation took place. Now it was getting too much. Something had to be done. After breakfast, you and Jimin left for your office. The parents watched as you both left the house. This time, Jimin got into his car alone and you into yours. It stung them a little knowing you both used to live together, sharing the same car. As the sound of engines faded, they sighed. This has gone long enough. They can't keep ignoring each other like this, she said, turning to her husband. They'll sort it out, he replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Not if they keep this up. I can't stand another meal where they just sit like mannequins, she countered, her tone tinged with desperation. Mr. Park nodded in agreement. Right, but they both are too stubborn to make the first move. He sighed, his eyes narrowing as he thought about a way to make you both talk. Maybe it's time for a little intervention, she said with a mischievous glint in her eyes, which made Mr. Park curious to know what was going on in her mind. What do you mean? He looked at her, raising an eyebrow. It's time to give them a little push. And how you gonna do that? You still have those handcuffs in your polo skirt, right? Mr. Park frowned and nodded hesitantly. Yeah, but why do you? He halted as things got clear in his mind. He blinked, his lips quirking in a small smirk as his gaze met his wife's mischievous one. If they won't talk on their own, maybe we can encourage them, she murmured, leaning in conspiratorially. Mr. Park chuckled when she winked at him. His wife's thoughtfulness had always amazed him, rendering him speechless. That evening, when you and Jimin returned from work, nothing had changed. The tension was still there, thick as ever. Your eyes met for a brief moment before you both tore your gazes away from each other. You both greeted your parents with fake smiles and enthusiasm before walking towards your shared bedroom. The elder one sighed in disappointment. The oddly silent house felt suffocating. They wanted the cheerfulness back in the house. They wanted to see their children being chaotic and beaming with genuine happiness instead of giving fake smiles every now and then. As you stepped out of the closet after changing your clothes, you bumped into Jimin. You lost your balance, but before your butt could kiss the ground, Jimin's arm coiled around your waist, steadying you. Your eyes shut close and your palms clutched a fistful of the fabric of his shirt. Few moments ticked on, and as reality sank into your mind, you slowly opened your eyes. Your eyes locked with his in a silent standoff. You both could see the love and longing in each other's eyes, but you were stubborn enough to not take the initiative. You were the first one to break the eye contact. Jimin sighed, rolling his eyes as he helped you stand straight. The silence was unbearable. You couldn't even remember what the argument was about, only that you were hurt. Jimin, on the other hand, was stubborn, too prideful to make the first move, even though his heart ached with the distance between the two of you. You sighed as you walked past him, bumping your shoulder with his. He gritted his teeth as he saw you walking away and out of the room. As the door clicked shut, he ran a reckless hand through his hair. Stubborn woman, he mumbled under his breath and disappeared inside the closet to change his clothes. The silence was killing him, but he wouldn't accept it openly. Stubborn man, you mumbled under your breath as you helped your mother-in-law in setting the table. The aftermath of the argument was irritating you to your core, but you didn't want to step up and resolve it. If he didn't want it, you didn't want it either. Mrs. Park noticed you muttering something to yourself, an irritated look marring your face. You were placing down the plates with extra force, insinuating you were angry, and she knew the reason very well. Everything's all right, honey. Her melodious voice startled you back from your reverie. You blinked and met her concerned gaze. The corner of your lips twitched into a subtle smile as you nodded. Yeah, Mom, you replied, but she still wasn't convinced. Are you sure you haven't been yourself lately? Her hand reached out to your arm, rubbing soothingly. This time, a small but genuine smile broke out on your lips. I'm fine, Mom, really. Just work is being a little tiring nowadays. Mrs. Park sighed at your made up excuse. You thought they didn't notice, but it was hard to ignore the unavoidable tension that lurked in a house. Take care, honey. Don't stress yourself too much, she asserted, not pushing you further. You gave a nod and turned your attention back on the task you were doing. Later, when you all sat together to have dinner, the tension lingered. as heavy as earlier. The silence was palpable once more. The clink of utensils against plates filled the air, and not a single word was spoken. Mrs. Park decided that enough was enough. She shared a knowing look with her husband, both conversing through their eyes. It was a time to execute what they discussed in the morning. As soon as the dinner plates cleared away, you and Jimin disappeared into separate corners of the house. You stayed in the kitchen to wash the dishes while Jimin retreated in the living room, his eyes glued to his phone. Jimin, wine, she called from the dining room with a tone too cheerful to be genuine. Come here for a second, we need to talk. Jimin stood up reluctantly while you took off your gloves, drying your hands before following him into the dining room. You both stood awkwardly on opposite ends of the room, neither daring to look at the other. What's going on? Jimin asked, furrowing his brows, sensing something strange in his mother's extra cheerful tone. Mrs. Park gave them a sweet, mischievous smile. We have noticed that you two haven't been well talking much lately. You two sighed, glancing at each other. We are fine, Mom, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction because he knew you two were anything but fine. There were differences between you two that neither of you was willing to resolve. Fine? Oh no, dear. The house is far too quiet to be fine. We may be old, but we are still sane enough to understand what's going on between you both. Nothing hides from parents' eyes, she uttered, folding her arms across her chest. You fidgeted with your fingers, glancing at Jimin from the corner of your eyes. He scraped his neck in discomfort, wanting a way out of the situation. Since you both are too stubborn to talk, your dad and I came up with a plan. Before you or Jimin could respond, Mr. Park emerged from his room holding a pair of handcuffs. Jimin's eyes widened while your jaw dropped in confusion. Mom, Dad, what is this? He asked, his voice incredulous. Mrs. Park stepped forward, holding your and Jimin's wrist as Mr. Park swiftly cuffed them together, not giving you a moment to react. Since neither of you seems to talk things out like adults, we have decided to help here. Jimin blinked in disbelief, tugging at the handcuffs, which only ended with him pulling your arm along. You have got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous. He gritted out, his frustration bubbling over. You clenched your jaw as he tugged at the handcuffs again, as if it would magically disappear. What's ridiculous is how the two of you have been acting. You are married. That means you talk to each other, and if you won't do that on your own, we are going to give you a little help. He retorted, wrapping his arm around his wife's shoulder. Mom, this isn't funny. You protested, but Mrs. Wag waved you off. Oh, it's not meant to be funny. It's meant to make you two talk. And sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to force people to face it. She smiled, sharing a look with her husband, who beamed back at her. You two need to work this out, and sometimes being forced to stay close can help remind you why you fell in love in the first place. She said gently, smiling at you two. This is insane. You guys can't seriously think that this is going to help. He barked, annoyed by the whole ordeal. You were no different either. You were as irritated as him and just wanted a way out of the handcuffs. You will be spending the evening handcuffed together, and we won't be here to help you escape. She smiled, ignoring the glares Jimin threw in their direction. We are going to stay the night at your sister's house, so you two will have plenty of time to resolve whatever this is, he added, smiling down at his wife. They were clearly enjoying your reactions. Mom, Dad, you can't leave us like this, you exclaimed, your face flushed with annoyance. Well, we just did, she said, stepping back, clearly satisfied with their work. Let's go, honey. Mr. Park nodded and followed her to the living room. The handcuffs clinked as you and Jimin followed after them. The metal clutches forced you to work and sink. Trust me, you'll thank us later, she mumbled, grabbing her overnight bag. You have the house and each other all by yourself. Resolve the issue. With that, the two parents walked out, leaving you and Jimin standing in the middle of the room, handcuffed to one another in stunned silence. As the door clicked shut and the quiet settled back in, the air between you was thick with unspoken words, but neither wanted to be the first to break the silence. The absurdity of the situation made it harder to stay angry, but neither was ready to let go of your pride just yet. The handcuffs jingled softly as you and Jimin sat stiffly on the couch, side by side but miles apart emotionally. You each tugged at the cuffs whenever the other shifted, the tension between you as taut as the metal chain linking your wrists. You both glared at the two opposite ends of the house, both of you too stubborn and too proud to say the first word that truly mattered. You both sat like that for what felt like hours, unwilling to move or face the issue. You sighed, glancing at Jimin, who was staring at your connected wrist with a mixture of annoyance and bewilderment. Neither of you spoke for a long moment. I hate this, you mumbled after what felt like an eternity, breaking the irritating silence. Jimin looked at you to find your gaze fixed on your joint wrist. I'm not liking this either, he snapped, frustration bubbling over. You lifted your gaze, throwing glares at him. He glared back with the same intensity. Of course, you don't like anything related to me. I guess now you don't like me either, isn't it? You mocked, rolling your eyes. His jaw clenched as you managed to irk his nerves. And you have this bad habit of thinking that you are right, always. But this isn't it. People are allowed to have different opinions, and so do I. I shouldn't be agreeing to whatever you said, he retorted, narrowing his eyes at you. You both glared at each other and then turned your heads away, facing opposite directions. For a while, you just sat there, avoiding each other's eyes, occasionally pulling at the cuffs, as if hoping you could magically break free. Can you at least try not to yank my arm every time you move? You snapped after Jimin yanked your arm while reaching for his phone. I'm not trying to. Maybe if you stopped moving every 5 seconds. He shot back, his frustration evident. Your expression hardened, but you held yourself back from saying anything and making the situation worse than it already was. You glared at the TV screen in front of you. A few moments rolled down, and you felt Jimin's fingers brushing against your hand. You yanked his hand away, which only ended with your wrist pulling along with his. Don't you dare to touch me, you snapped, squinting your eyes at him. He glared at you and forcefully intertwined his hand with yours. I'm not dying to touch you. I'm doing it so that neither of us gets hurt. He countered, placing your intertwined wrist in the gap between you both. You sighed out loud and decided to stay silent. But the situation escalated when you felt the urge to empty your bladder. Closing your eyes, you rebuked yourself and tried to hold back, but it was not something you could hold for longer. When the pressure became too much to endure, you looked at Jimin, your cheeks flushing red in embarrassment. Listen, I need to use the washroom. He snapped his head towards you, his eyes wide in disbelief. Are you kidding me? Why didn't you do the business earlier? His words irked you even more. As if I knew that I was going to end up like this. I didn't exactly choose this, okay? Now get up and move with me. You pushed off the couch and pulled his hand. He whined, nevertheless got up reluctantly. He groaned as you forced him to follow you down the hall. What have I gotten myself into? Look away, you mumbled, heat rising up to your cheeks. He rolled his eyes and turned his back at you, giving you as much privacy as possible. She is reacting like I haven't seen anything, he muttered under his breath. He whistled, counting the number of tiles till the time you emptied your bladder. Gosh, this is humiliating, you mumbled, downcasting your eyes. You quickly got done and walked to the wash basin to wash your hands. Wash your hands, you snapped when you saw Jimin standing still, his gaze stuck at you. Why should I? It's you who did the business. He shrugged his shoulders nonchalantly. You nudged your elbow in his stomach, earning a groan from him. You came in the restroom with me. Wash your hands. He huffed and squirted out a good amount of hand wash. He lathered the soap and applied it till his elbows. Your movements halted when you watched him rubbing his hands with a force. Your jointed arms shaking with his movements. After he rinsed off the soap with water, he turned towards you. Happy, or you want me to take a shower? You slowly shook your head and washed your hands before walking out of the restroom along with him. After the awkward washroom ordeal, you both returned to the couch, faces flushed. You two avoided glancing at each other. The silence hung between you once more, but this time it felt a little less suffocating. Look, this isn't working, he muttered after a few minutes of silence. Let's just get through the night without killing each other, okay? Fine by me, you said, though there was a softness in your voice now, as if the handcuffs were slowly chipping away at the wall between you two. A comfortable silence fell over as you both relaxed back on the couch, stealing glances at each other time and again. Eventually, Jimin broke the silence. Do you want to watch a movie or something? You nodded, almost hesitantly. Yeah, sure. Let's go and grab some snacks. You both awkwardly stood, still handcuffed together, and headed to the kitchen to make some snacks. The situation had become less irritating but more awkward. However, with your movements restricted by the handcuffs, everything became a clumsy mess. You stirred the corn in a pan, heating them up to the appropriate temperature. Jimin, pass me the lid from there. He nodded, but as he moved to fetch the lid, he pulled you along. The spatula slipped from your hand and fell on the floor. The sound gained Jimin's attention. He looked back at you. Are you okay? He asked, his tone laced with concern. I am. Fetch the lid quickly. You, you said as the corn started popping. Jimin's eyes widened and he hastily tried to reach the lid, but in the haste of the moment, you both bumped into each other. The lid slipped down to the floor. You both bent down to pick it up but ended up bumping your heads. Sighing at the clumsiness of the situation, you both stood upright, but till then, the popcorn had started spilling everywhere. The clumsiness of the situation had turned into something comical. You pursed your lips, biting back your laughter, and looked at Jimin. He looked equally amused. But you couldn't hold your laughter when a popcorn settled on the top of Jimin's head. A burst of laughter escaped your lips while Jimin watched you with raised eyebrows. Another popcorn popped and occupied a space on the top of your head. Now it was Jimin's turn to laugh. The kitchen looked like a mess while you both stood in between the popcorn mess. The ridiculousness of the situation finally hit you both and you burst into laughter. I can't believe this. We are a disaster, you giggled, wiping a tear from the corner of your eyes. Indeed, he chuckled, shaking his head. For the first time in days, the tension between you both eased. You two stood there for a moment, the laughter breaking the ice that had kept you apart for so long. Your laughter subsided, but a smile remained etched across your face. Jimin looked at you, his expression softening. I am sorry, Ryan, for whatever this has been, for not talking to you. You sighed, the apology loosening something in your chest. I am sorry too, Jimin. I hate this. I don't even remember why we fought. You mumbled, taking a step closer to him. Me neither. You both laughed quietly, shaking your heads at the absurdity of it all. It had taken handcuffs and an embarrassing amount of awkward movements to bring you to this point, but somehow it was working. Jimin took a step closer and wrapped his arms around you, pulling you in a hug. He buried his face in your hair and let out a soft sigh. I missed you. I missed you too, you whispered, burrowing your face against his chest. You both stood there, wrapped in each other's arms for knows how long. Neither of you wanted to part away. Moments later, you both reluctantly pulled away, smiling at each other. Let's clean the mess and watch a movie, yeah? You nodded and you both indulged in cleaning the mess. You both returned to the couch with your snacks and settled in, your hands still bound, but your hearts a little lighter. You put on a movie, and as it played, you two found yourself slowly leaning into each other. By the time the credits rolled, you were cuddled up, the handcuffs no longer a burden. As the night wore on, the exhaustion from the emotional roller coaster and the cozy warmth of the couch lulled you both into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Park quietly opened the door, tiptoeing into the living room. They smiled when they saw you and Jimin curled up together on the couch, fast asleep. The handcuffs still binding your wrist, but the tension was gone. Mrs. Park exchanged a pleased look with her husband. Told you it would work, she whispered, her eyes shining with happiness. Mr. Park chuckled softly. You always know best, he said, wrapping his arm around her shoulder, thereby pulling her in a side hug. And as they watched their son and daughter-in-law sleeping soundly, they knew that the bond between them has been restored, stronger than ever.